I'm a huge political junkie.
I mean, the problem is that most people who decide to run for office are kind of jerks.
Yeah.
For the most part. I think, because who'd want to do it or subject yourself to it, you know?
I haven't met many politicians, successful or even on the way to being successful or running.
Let's save all of our fun banter. Let me know when you hit record.
As a broadcast journalist, I've spent my life traveling the world and made my living interviewing the greatest fighters of all time. When boxing shut down, I finally had a chance to look around this world of conflict and could see the fight in everyone. Until this day, I talk to the greatest fighters and thinkers of our time about their fight. On Luminary, I'm Radio Rahim, till this day. Today we start the first chapter in the book of an iconoclastic leader, still finding his path to a pulpit. He may not be the leader of the free world, but he is the leader of a gang. Yang Gang boss, Andrew Yang. Chapter 1, The Indomitable Spirit.
I think there's something really fundamental that you're touching on, which is that there's something fundamental about fighters. And there's some overlap between fighters, entrepreneurs, creatives, people who are fighting for a particular social cause or movement. You have something inside you that you're trying to express where you have to get out there and express yourself. And certainly I think fighting is like the most pure form of expression in a way, like more so than a lot of others.
Ernest Hemingway said, a boxing match is the most honest conversation two men can have.
Yeah, there's so much wisdom to it. There's something that's gone wrong in our culture where if I say something that you disagree with, then you get up in arms with me in a way that you're wrong, I'm right, and people can't disagree anymore.
Without being disagreeable.
We're in a moment where if you have certain kind of behaviors or transgressions, then it's sort of off limits. Like I have two young boys as an example. And one thing that I say, I was thrilled to hear, because what was instinctive inside me as a parent was that rough play is good for the development of boys. I think getting punched in the face at some point in your life is very positive. You know,
I agree. Being punched in your face early in life is an imperative because you're not made of glass. And if you recognize that fear that's in you of being broken, if you learn that early, boy, I think your life's going to be a lot easier when adversity comes.
Yeah, and so that's literal and figurative. I was the lone Asian kid in my predominantly white school, and I got into fights all the time as a kid because I'd get called chink or gook, and then I'd be like,
well, I guess I have to fight over this.
And so then I would fight and generally lose because I was quite scrawny. But then when I was 17, I had this massive chip on my shoulder, and I was like in the gym just pumping iron and training in Taekwondo and just generally trying to express some of my anger, I suppose, in various ways. So I did compete, and I have been punched in the face and things like that. I was more likely to get kicked in the face than punched in the face at TKD because, you know, you're not supposed to get punched in the face in tournaments, though it happens.
Wait, is it illegal to punch in the face in a Taekwondo tournament?
You do not score, and it is illegal in that sense. So it would be a foul.
I never knew that.
Yeah, you can kick and get kicked in the face, and you can punch to the body between the waist and the neck. That's the target for punching, but you're not supposed to sock each other in the face.
Now that's for safety reasons. That hasn't to do with the discipline of Taekwondo. That's just because of the tournament rules.
Those are just tournament rules. You know, in theory, if it was a real fight, you should just be pounding each other's faces. But tournament rules, you're not supposed to punch in the head.
How did you choose Taekwondo as the discipline you would study?
Well, it's the 90s, and Taekwondo was hugely popular. There's a Korean grandmaster there who was very, very accomplished, 5th degree black belt, Master Kim. And my brother was a black belt in Taekwondo. And so we joke now about how Taekwondo, as we all know, and I think Joe Rogan talks about this, Taekwondo was very, very popular. And then we all kind of realized that it wasn't the most practical martial art for real fighting. And so, you know, I imagine that it's been supplanted by MMA in many towns.
Well, it may not be the most practical if you're fighting a person who is also disciplined in other martial arts. But in the street or on the schoolyard, you're probably fighting a guy that hasn't studied anything, and Taekwondo is incredibly effective.
I'd even disagree there, unfortunately. I'm sorry, TKD enthusiasts, but it's more of a sport than like a practical fighting art. And if you were good at TKD, you would probably be attempting to do things in a fight that are not the most efficient way to actually disable your opponent or win that fight.
Before you studied martial arts and figured out, okay, well, hand-to-hand skills are something I need to acquire, while you're being bullied in school, how did you manage to overcome that kind of adversity or that environment without violence?
Well, again, I would fight and lose. So, I'm not sure there was like any great tips there, being like, hey, go get your ass kicked on the regular.
Were you able to form a group of friends that made you a little bit more socially popular and less bullied?
That's actually a good point. I kind of forgot about this. I did make friends with various people, and among them was like the head cheerleader, Tara Stevers, and then...
The fact that you know both her names still means that she's a legend.
You know what I mean? But it was true. It's like one of the adaptations I had from that time was like, I should try and be friends with girls that folks liked, because then it was less productive to to like pick a fight with me or whatever. It's like, well, that might not be the wisest thing to do if they're if they're like if the cheerleaders are around and they like this guy because he might have helped someone with their homework. I was the nerdy Asian kid, and so a lot of that period, my adolescence, was just trying to avoid being considered the nerdy Asian kid.
At some point later, much later in life, you joined the most important popularity contest on the planet. You should have married Beyonce.
That's really funny. I'd kind of forgotten about any social adaptations I'd made as a kid. And yeah, the nation's biggest popularity contest, running for president. There are a lot of things that are turning us against each other, but one of the main ones is that I became convinced that we're automating away a lot of the most common jobs in the economy, and it's turning us against each other. But one of the main ones is that the ability for people to make a living the way they used to has changed. So I ran for president on the idea that we should have a universal basic income where everyone gets a certain amount of money to meet your basic needs. That would help us all adapt. That was the impetus for me running. I just really was 100% certain that we were going to need a solution like this sooner rather than later.
You have a practical application of solutions. That's the fundamental difference between what everybody else was saying, in my opinion, and what you were saying. You just looked at the problem and the most practical way to solve it. When did you realize that that was your strength, and how did that apply in your personal life, making things just easier for Andrew Yang?
There became like this self-development mindset where I felt like a misfit and outsider because I was picked on and just felt like an alien, frankly, in a lot of these environments. So I turned my energies inward somewhat, in the sense that I was like,
okay, how do I change this, or how do I feel better?
And so I would start out in a social situation feeling like an outsider and be like,
okay, like how do I change that?
If I was scrawny and losing fights, and it's like,
all right, how do I change that?
Well, one thing that happened to me too, as an example, it's like I became hooked on the Knicks during the Ewing era Knicks, losing to the Bulls. There's a lot of losing in the
you're a glutton for
adolescent
punishment.
memory bank. So I thought it would be hugely pathetic if I was the Asian kid who liked watching basketball but didn't play basketball. So I was like,
all right, I guess I'll learn how to play basketball now.
So I would go out, and for a while it was pretty brutal. And like I would miss a layup, and the kids would be like, I guess that was a Chinese layup, and like shit like that. Like just really rough shit. So I just had this mindset where it's like, look, if you want something, just put yourself through it, whatever it is, and then improve and get better. Like first time I went to the gym, I couldn't lift that much on the bench press or whatever. And then you just apply yourself. I was like drinking protein shakes and like doing all that stuff.
Did you have a six-pack and cut arms?
I got to a point where I was benching 225 12 times. Like it was like that was. So here's like a random picture that someone posted. Me in like the 20s. So I was like, it looked like I was in the gym.
I wouldn't just readily start a bar fight with that guy. I'd be like, oh, I'm gonna have my hands full with this one. Maybe we should just talk it out.
So there's that. There was that too, where it was like a violent streak. So
at some point, did you become the bully?
I don't think I was a bully in the conventional sense, but there was certainly a point when I would feel like I shouldn't back down from things. And so you go from being like the person who loses to being the person who's like,
all right, like I'll fight you.
like that attitude stuck with me. It happened too when, I decided to start my own business and then my business failed. And then it was like,
all right, let's get better at this.
There's always like, well, let's get better at this kind of approach. And I think that's one reason why I appreciate fighters so much is clearly to be a high level fighter, you have to get into the gym and get into the lab and like continuously hone yourself. And that stance of self-development and self-improvement, I think, is the most important thing in our lives many times, is just this feeling that you can grow, feeling you can improve, that you can get better, you can learn, you can develop your skills. I think that's the thing that many creatives have in common with fighters, because it's not like creative can just pop out and be like, hey, now I'm going to be Dave Chappelle and be in front of tens of thousands of people. Like you have to grind out a bunch of like really bad sets, and so if you're a boxer or a fighter, you had to get in there and get your ass kicked by other boxers in the gym or other mixed martial artists. And then eventually, hopefully you improve.
The advantage of a fighter, once their career begins, even in the amateurs, you can focus on your next challenge. You can say that I'm fighting Joe X on such and such a date, and this is the hurdle I have to overcome. He is my opponent.
Yeah.
I know what adjustments I need to make to clear that hurdle, to defeat this opponent. For a creative or an academic or an entrepreneur, someone that has that fight in them, that has a purpose, sometimes it's not as easy to define what or whom the opponent is, what it is that you're trying to clear as a hurdle. Did you know?
The opponent often is just inertia or nothing. If you do something, like I've written a couple books. The first time you write a book, your opponent is just having no one pay any attention to the book you wrote. Your opponent is like 0 sales, and you're like, how am I going to get that 0 to 1 and 2 or 1,000 or whatever the hell it is? So I think that's the challenge that a lot of these creatives have, is that you put something out and then you want people to value it and discover it. And unfortunately, in the era we're in now, then you have numbers for that. You're like, how many views did I get? How many? And someone shoot me in the head, but it's like, how many likes did I get, or whatever the fucking social media bullshit,
Right. Would you say the opponent is obscurity?
I think for a lot of folks in the creative fields, the opponent is obscurity.
Well, what was the opponent for you?
Well, the opponent for me was I went to law school and then practiced law for 5 months and hated it. Just thought it was the most terrible job. And that motivated me because I saw what kind of soul-crushing bullshit work you might have to do if you really just had no other course in front of you. And I said, okay, I would be miserable and become a fairly incomplete human being. The scariest thing about being that corporate lawyer was that I found myself adapting to it, because we're very adaptable. So you do something, and this is one of the reasons why the world looks the way it does, is I can stick you in a position and it can be very uncomfortable because you're doing something that you feel uncomfortable with. But if I just say,
look, I'm going to pay you enough money and just shut up and do that.
And then after a while, you'll be like,
all right, I guess this is my thing.
Like whatever it is. So I felt that happening to me. I was in my mid-20s and was like,
am I really just going to become this transaction cost?
In these large transactions where I visualize the worst things that can happen and conform legal documents and then get my paycheck and go home and comfort myself. Is that really the path? So when I left to start my business and the business failed, I was like,
all right, like I sure as fuck have to get better at this.
Because if I don't, I'm going to end up doing a job that makes me dislike myself. And of course, I was very fortunate in that I was educated and had what I thought were, like I always had a fallback. I never thought I was going to starve to death. And that's unusual. And one thing I also know about fighters is like a lot of them are like, this is my path to a decent life. Like, I like it was this or something very, very shitty. Like, and you see fighters coming out of difficult circumstances quite often because what Kevin Hart said was outrunning poverty, like a lot of folks were outrunning poverty. For me, I was trying to build a path for myself that would bring out better parts of me and not make me dislike what I was doing day to day. It was very important to me to be doing work that I actually gave a shit about. And I felt that way in part because I did work that I didn't give a shit about and really, really disliked both myself and the day to day.
The nature of outrunning poverty suggests that I don't have a lot of options by which to do this. Okay, I got this one gift, this one talent, and if I apply that, then maybe this is my route out. But you had multiple routes out of poverty. So you had to combat complacency and just being able to be comfortable doing something that didn't inspire you.
Poverty was never the danger. The danger to me was looking at myself in the mirror at age 40 and saying,
why the fuck did you never do anything that you'd actually be proud of?
My parents immigrated to this country from Taiwan. My dad is an inventor, had 69 U.S. patents, and they came here for a better life for me and my brother. And so I thought to myself, like, did my parents move here so I could just do some bullshit job that no one cares about, so I could make enough money so I could live in a house in the suburbs and self-replicate, trying to have kids who I stick on the same hamster wheel and maybe they too can get some soul-crushing corporate job? And like, is that what success is? Is success just so we can go to the mall on weekends? I mean, that's terrible. You know, there has to be another reason why my parents immigrated here than that. So I did feel like I had something that I could offer that was more than what folks wanted to slot me in for.
You've been a CEO, an entrepreneur, you've been a presidential candidate, and you've been a lawyer, apparently. Did there come a time when, more so than just not wanting to do something mundane and wanting to do something that had impact, where it took shape of you actually had a dream or a goal to accomplish? Like, I want and have passion to do this specific thing.
Yeah.
This is my impact.
That's one of the things I laugh about. It's like, you don't want to introduce yourself as an entrepreneur. You want to introduce yourself as like whatever the heck you're doing right then. I've had a whole number of dreams. The first company I started was .com that tried to make celebrity philanthropy more effective using the internet, which was brand new at that time. It was 2000. Then I became a party promoter. Then I became the CEO of an education company. Like, you know, I've done a bunch of things. And if someone asked me at any moment in time what I was doing, I would just say that thing.
Did you reach a place where they were successful and you were like, this still isn't the thing?
My internet company failed, and then I worked for a wireless software company that also failed. And then I became, I guess, a fairly successful nightclub promoter in the sense that lots of people showed up and good times were had by all. But I became the CEO of an education company that grew to become number one in the country. So that was successful. And during that time, I met my now wife, Evelyn. And so I understand this feeling that a lot of guys have, because I spent my 20s in this mode where you just are fighting to prove yourself. And I had not just one failure, but several failures throughout my 20s. And it's hard to form a positive attitude about yourself or form the kinds of relationships you want when you're not sure what your place in the world is professionally. And I think, unfortunately, far too many people are in that position. And I understand what that anger feels like. I had it for my entire 20s. And I was so grateful that I found a role as the head of this education company that was a better fit. It matured me. I felt like I became the head of a household because I was responsible for dozens of employees at that time. And if I made a good decision, it helped grow the family. And if I made a bad decision, then, you know, the family would shrink. It's one reason why I love small business owners so much. Anyone from the self-employed hustler to someone who, you know, owns a restaurant. I mean, restaurants employ tons of people, to private business like the one I ran, because your decision making is so pure. You really need to make the right calls or else the family is going to die. So during that time, it matured me. It leveled me out. Like, I became less angry. I think I spent most of my 20s looking for my place in the world. And then when I found a good fit professionally, then it enabled me to get engaged and married. And then that company was then bought by a public company in 2009. And it was funny where I thought,
okay, cool. Like, now I work for this big company. I'm the president of a division.
I got cashed out to some extent. So this should be pretty mellow and like positive. But I fucking hated working for that company again. It's like I'd been my own boss for X number of years, win or lose, and then reporting into the structure. And they were nice to me too. But I was still like, oh God, I can't do this shit. So you talk about what the visions or dreams were at different times. They went from running this company to, okay, I think the country needs more entrepreneurs in places like Detroit and Cleveland and Baltimore and New Orleans. Let me start an organization to do that. And so I started a nonprofit called Venture for America that trains entrepreneurs to help start businesses in cities around the country. And I did that for the better part of 7 years. And that's what I did before I decided to run for president.
But in your mid-20s, especially a guy as ambitious as you with as many talents and qualifications as you have, continuing to fail, not knowing that these successes are coming, can not only be scary, but get pretty dark. You talked about being angry in your 20s and going through these things at the same time. How dark did it get?
It was hard. When my first company failed, I remember lying on the floor looking up at the ceiling thinking,
What am I going to do? Like, how to come to this?
and keep in mind, I owed $100,000 plus in school loans at that time too, because law school is very expensive and it didn't go away when I decided to start a company. It's one reason why some people thought I was nuts. And that period was really tough on my confidence and self-esteem. It took me a while to realize that no one knew that I had a net worth of negative $100,000 unless I was stupid enough to tell them. You know what I mean? Like I just walked into a conversation. I'm in a bar or a restaurant. I just seem like a dude. So you realize it's in your head, but it's not in other people's heads. I felt like a failed entrepreneur, which I was. And a lot of people knew I was a failed entrepreneur because obviously if you start a company, you have to tell everyone that you're doing this company. But a lot of people looked and said, hey, Andrew's an interesting guy who is like swinging big. And even though it didn't work out, he's still a guy with something to offer. So you realize that the stuff you're beating yourself up over is more in your head than in anyone else's. It's not like when you show up, someone's just like,
Oh, that fucking asshole Andrew, he like lost his investors that money.
and he, owes these school loans. What a failure. Like, that's not what other people are thinking. That's just what I was thinking
Right.
for like a period of time. So when you start divorcing your own sense of your failures from how other people see you, then it got better.
There's a lot of aggressive black music that was wildly popular at the time, the late 90s, early 2000s. When I saw your presidential playlist for Spotify, people would be surprised how much hip hop was on there. And when you talk in conversation, you reference it. Was that your connection at the time to the culture? What were you connecting to? Were you connecting to your Asian American culture?
Let's be clear, in the early to mid 2000s, there's no such thing as Asian American culture. Really.
There's Jackie Chan.
There was Jackie Chan, good old Rush Hour movies. But yeah, I listened to a ton of hip hop. And the fact is, if you were trying to identify a way to express some kind of non-white community identity during that time, it's black culture. There was no YouTube, so there were no like Asian American like influencers. And the fact is, I just loved hip hop. When I was a nightclub promoter, we would just play a shit ton of hip hop. It was the music of the time, and it was on my playlist because I would just go to the gym to it and listen to it and party to it. I mean, what the hell else would you listen to and party to at that time? It's like to me, it's bewildering. Like, what the hell else you could have been doing at that time, because that was the party music.
It wasn't just party music. It was prosperity music. It's about what I have, how I got it, and how
like
much
that.
more
Prosperity
I have
music.
than you. Yeah.
Money ain't a thing.
Money ain't a thing. That's right. How much black culture helped you out of that dark place and pinpointing the kind of cool Andrew Yang that we see before us.
Well, thank you, man. I really appreciate that. It helped a lot because that culture, to me, was like an aspirational culture of entrepreneurship in many ways. And if you look at the black community, in my mind, you're kind of forced to be an entrepreneur, because how else are you going to make positive things happen in a lot of these circumstances? It's not like you can just get your hand stamped and get your ticket punched and then they're going to be like, oh, you're the new CEO. Like, you pretty much have to start your own your own thing. My dad came home from IBM one day. I mean, even that shit, I know. So my dad's a lab geek, and he comes home and he says he's mad. And I'm like,
Why are you mad?
and then he said,
Well, when you can't invent anything anymore at IBM, and they make you a manager. So it's all white managers and Chinese people in the lab.
and it
Wow.
made him mad. And I listened to it and I was like,
Wow, that's pretty fucked up.
and as a teenager, you're like,
Is that true?
and then you were like,
Well, it's what my dad says, and I'll take his word for it.
it left an impression on me too, where I was like, if I want to make something good happen, I might have to do it myself. The thing I don't necessarily want to do is be trying to punch the clock in a large corporate environment and then hope the white guy likes me after, X years to like knight me, because that's a shitty way to have your career determined. I'd rather get out there and win or lose.
Immigrant culture often bends towards security. The parents, they came here, give you opportunity.
They've been quite unhappy with my decisions for quite some time, if that's what you're suggesting. It's not like the Asian parents.
I have to assume that early on, this had to be a tough pill for them to swallow. There is no security in it. There's no safety net. Even though you have abilities and resources, you're not a doctor. You're not going to continue to be a lawyer. You're not going to be something that they could fully understand. Do you have that conversation with them?
I joked all the time on the trail that it's like my parents just told people I was still a lawyer because, they're Asian parents, but they were unhappy with my decisions. They got more on board when they sensed that I was working hard and trying really hard, because that, as a parent, you're like, well, the person's busting their ass, then, maybe there's something to this. But they didn't understand what I did for a living for years, because, how do you say? It's like, well, now I'm a nightclub promoter, or now I do this and that. My parents were not, frankly, initially supportive, because if you're Asian American, you're not thinking like you want your kid to go into politics a whole lot. It's like the first generation. It is, you come here, you want your kids to get a good education so they can have a secure foothold in this country and then really build a place for themselves. It's funny that in my mind, I was like, you didn't come here so I could, fight for my, like a better model of car in my fucking driveway in the suburbs or whatever.
They're like, yes, we did.
Yeah, they actually would be pretty into that. But to my parents' credit, and I love my parents and owe everything to them. One, they learned at some point, and my mom did. My dad's sort of a workaholic and was like, whatever, you do you. But my mom learned at some point that having a disagreement with me did not tend to lead any place good. And so she was like, if I disagreed with you, I'd just try and keep it to myself. And they're not super materialistic in that way. It's like they never were looking for me to provide for them, which I know many, many immigrant kids have to do, because you're looking up and you have folks to take care of. That they always wanted me and my brother to just have to look out for ourselves.
Even if you believed you could solve all the world's problems, could you do it with the whole world watching? Chapter 2, Fake It Till You Make It. You meet your wife. At what point in this journey towards success?
I met my wife when I was first becoming the CEO of this education company. And I don't think that's a coincidence, because I'd found a role that I could sink my teeth into and feel good about for an extended period of time. And then I met her. We dated for years before we got engaged and married. So things clicked into place for me, both professionally and personally, around the same time when I was in my early 30s.
Does your wife have a similar background to yourself?
She's Chinese American. She grew up the daughter of immigrants in New York, in her case, in Bayside, Queens. So there are a lot of similarities there.
Making this connection with one individual, you have a similar history. Was the difference between you feeling alone on this journey, trying to make this work, make the other thing work?
Which is one reason why I was so willing to try to venture out on my own, because I was like, I don't even have a wife and kids. Like, who the fuck am I? Like, like, I'm just a dude, like in my 20s running around New York City. So, like I should really bust my ass and hustle and not care about the hypothetical future family anyway.
Was your immediate family happy to see you in this kind of relationship? Did that offer them a vision of some stability for you? Like get them off your back a little bit?
Yeah, they loved Evelyn from day one. And they seemed to recognize that this education company was a good fit for me. So really it was like my early 30s when everything seemed like it was on the up and up. It really got dicey again when I left to start this nonprofit that had a budget of literally zero. Like, so I leave, I'm like,
hey, I'm going to start this nonprofit. It's going to create thousands of jobs. We're going to train hundreds, eventually thousands of young people who want to start businesses around the country in 15 cities, and it's going to be incredible.
If you tell your parents that, they're like,
wait, didn't you just like spend X years running this company and now you finally made it someplace stable and like you're ditching it again to do this thing?
And I was like,
yes, because I think it's really important that people have a chance to start businesses. Because I remember when I tried to start businesses, it was fucking hardest thing in the world and I failed. And like, if we have so many people who never even get that chance, then it's going to be bad for the country, economy, society.
Because entrepreneurship has been dying in this country for a long time. But I decided, well, you can't bitch about something without doing something about it. So let me go do something about it. But my parents at that point were like,
oh no, like what's happening here?
And not high on the immigrant list is quit your job and start a nonprofit that has no money until you decide to put money into it. And then you run around asking everyone for money.
At that time in your life, do you still feel like you're fighting obscurity? Are you still fighting internally? I've got to make my mark. I've got to be something significant.
Well, this is going to sound like horseshit coming from a guy who's now a public figure, but I learned a ton when I was running this education company. All right, check it out. So before the education company, I worked for a healthcare software company. After the wireless software company that did not work out, I joined a healthcare software company. So I've worked for a whole number of startups. This healthcare software company, it had some big name backers. It had a venture story to it. You know, raise millions of dollars, get bigger investors, try and get people hyped. And so there were a lot of big wigs associated with it. Then you go run this education company and it's a private business. There are no investors. Your students are young adults. And there's really no one that you have to kind of hustle to get alongside in order to grow the business. The only way to grow the business is to just teach students and find good teachers and develop better materials and figure out internet marketing and like do things that are just nuts and bolts, block and tackling of building a business. So I did that for 6 years and I was completely anonymous during that time because it was actually bad for the company for people to know I was a CEO because then they'd be like, okay, I like this guy, but he's a CEO, you know, so of course I like him. I'm not going to like anyone else here. And so I would teach whole classes and not identify myself as a CEO. I would like teach people for months.
Because you were too well liked?
No, so it was an education company. And one of the dangers in an education company context is that you build up a cult of personality around the leader or CEO. So that if you're a company and you hire the education company to teach your analysts or whatever,
sure,
then you say, I want the best. And that's going to be the CEO. And so it was always in my interest to try and avoid that, to try and make it seem like, look, everyone, and it was also, it happened to be true that everyone at the company was excellent and it didn't matter if it was like me or someone else.
Which you would never hear politicians say.
Yeah, probably not. But this was a maturation for me too, because when you're doing like the venture thing, it was like, oh yeah, we're like, you know, we're trying to make our name. But then in the context of this company, the growth of the company was contingent upon just doing excellent work, and making a name for Andrew Yang was actually counterproductive. So I became very comfortable in being what I thought was just an effective leader and builder. And the way to be an effective leader and builder was to enlist and hire the right people, manage people effectively, plan a fun event, like bring the team someplace that they'd enjoy, morale building. It was all about that. So when I left to start Venture for America, there was like this massive adjustment because I was actually essentially anonymous, like at the time when I started Venture for America. And when I started Venture for America, I thought I could still be anonymous because I was like, look, this is a great idea. We should totally create a path for entrepreneurs around the country. And it doesn't matter who I am. It's a really good idea. Like, shouldn't you support this idea? And it turned out that people wanted to buy into an individual as well as an organization in the context of starting a nonprofit. So if you have the ambition of starting a nonprofit, FYI, you know, it's good if people are into you as well. It's one reason why you see a lot of like the heads of nonprofits try and build profiles in this way, because it ends up being important and effective. Again, this is where it sounds like horseshit for a guy who ran for president. I still don't really care that much about my public profile in the sense that if I could get everything I wanted to get done and no one knew who the fuck Andrew Yang was,
Who's that?
done. Like, I'd be perfectly happy with that. Even now, I see my own public profile as like an instrument where it's like, if I can use my public profile to get money into everyone's hands and eradicate completely unnecessary poverty, like I'll do that every second of my waking life. Do I care about any of the trappings of being a public figure? Not really. I'm a dad. I've got 2 young kids. I'd rather be chilling with them than at some event sucking up to someone. Most of the stuff that politicians do, I'm generally repulsed by. It's like going to the events and jerking each other off.
You're so amazing.
Like it's not like it's not an optimal way to spend a Friday evening. And you got to keep in mind too, like when I decided to run for president, that was probably an objectively stupid decision in the sense that, like no political consultants were like,
It's a great idea.
like, my family was like,
This is not a great idea.
like,
Thank you, Evelyn, for being supportive.
and everyone always like believed in me, but even she was not like,
This is a great idea.
she was like,
This is the right thing to do because you think you can advance real solutions.
So Venture for America was trying to solve this problem of the fact that jobs were going away in a lot of the country. And then I realized, oh my gosh, like the jobs are going away because of much, much bigger trends, like Amazon soaking up 20 billion in business a year and AI and self-driving cars and trucks and all this stuff. I was like, there is no way that my nonprofit is going to be able to address this tidal wave. And then I thought, well,
How could you address this tidal wave?
and I was like, there is no way to address this tidal wave unless you rewrite the rules of the economy. And how can you do that? The only way you could conceivably do that is if you were to become head of the federal government. Okay, what does it take to become head of the federal government? Oh, you run for president. What are the rules of running for president? There are only 2 rules: natural born citizen and 35 years or older. That's it. One of the reasons why people got behind me, and thank you for expressing it, is that you can kind of tell I'm just trying to fix problems and implement solutions, and I don't really care about the ceremony.
It is cult of personality. You do have to counter being practical and applying solutions with whether or not you like me. And if liking me,
That's kind of true.
to like me means that I can't say this over here, which would actually work. But if I say what works and it makes you not like me, well, then I can't get the job and I can't do anything. So I'll stop saying the things that you don't want to hear, even though those are the solutions, just so you'll like me. Then by the time you get in the job, all of the prescriptions are watered down or devoid of actual practical implication.
You've summarized at least one of the big problems, which is that in order to advance politically, people tend to try and focus group and figure out what people will like. And so you wind up not actually changing anything that big. I'm so proud of the fact that now a majority of Americans think universal basic income is a good idea, because it wasn't like that before I ran. And it's a little bit like what Steve Jobs said is like, you don't ask people what they want all the time. Like sometimes you just build it. It's like this mindset that fighters are a part of. When I get in the ring, like, shit's gonna go down like one way or another.
Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face.
Exactly.
The first part of your life, through your 20s, we're battling anonymity. Then you concede that ground for success. I see this model in which me being the face doesn't really affect the goal. I'll step back, recede into the shadows, and affect the goal. At what point did you connect to the greater world, or at least this nation, and say, my success can be tethered to the greater good of my fellow American?
So some people would regard that as altruism, but for me, it's really problem solving. It just so happens that I've been attracted to problems that do not have a market-based solution. Things can work better than they are working now. And at some point in time, I came to think that maybe I can be someone who helps things work better. It's just the way my soul works, I guess, where like if I see a problem, it's like, oh, someone should fix that. And at some point you realize that no one else is going to fix that, especially not in this moment in American life.
When your successes became public, did people then look back and be like, oh, this guy was of value? Was there a moment when people started to see the light and be like, I see what this guy is on his way to doing, what he's fighting for?
Let's say I was an artist and it was great art, but absolutely no one appreciated the art,
Right. Right.
Then everyone would be like, oh, look at that asshole, like painting his weird figures in his loft. There has to be something intrinsic about the process that's not borne out by money. But unfortunately, the way a lot of us work is that most people started thinking Andrew's in a good place or onto something when I started having some kind of market-based success. It's one of the things that, again, it makes me sad and angry because there's so many people doing extraordinary things that the market right now is absolutely ignoring or punishing.
What's the market-based success that you're referring to?
In my parents' case, it's like, oh, like I'm happy when Andrew starts being able to make a good living. And when he makes a good living, or his education company gets sold, it's like, all right, now I'm happy. That didn't actually change who I was, but I appreciate it, and that's the way the world works. Those kind of markers were what turned many people in my direction more positively. When I was building my company, I realized that what other people thought of me was not super central. When I decided to run for president, I remember thinking, you have to be willing to accept total humiliation if you're going to do this. And I was cool with that. I was like, well, as long as my wife is still with me and my friends still will take my calls and, my kids still love daddy, then who cares? The fact that I've gotten some degree of market-based success now, to me, is independent of what I should be seeking. It's very tough to make that distinction when you're younger in particular and you're still trying to strive and figure it out, because everyone's going to judge you based on what the market judges you on. It's one reason why I'm so anxious to humanize our market, because right now there are all of these people that are getting left behind that deserve better. I'm sure thousands and thousands of fighters, particularly in MMA, which they're completely systematically under rewarded for their talents. The market there is not a true market. It's the UFC exploiting the shit out of people. If you look at it in like the creative fields and artistic endeavors, music, none of those people are getting rewarded appropriately at this point. You know what I mean? Like, you have a handful of mega winners in these industries and then all these people who deserve better. If you ask me about when people started to be into me, it's when the market liked me. But I would never get confused, because if I took my cues from the market, I never would have done any of the shit that I've done. You know what I mean? And it's one reason why you don't have people like me running for president, is because if you achieve a certain level of success in the market, then you're never going to want to jeopardize it. And then you'll never get anywhere. Whereas in my case, I was willing to risk it all, because I was like, what is all? Like, no one knows who the fuck I am. Who cares? Let's do this thing.
One thing that often is a marker for a change in a young, talented athlete is having children. You talked about being young and, hey, man, I got no wife, no kids. I can throw shit at the wall and try it. And let me live free and do this. A lot of people fight like that with reckless abandon. They handle their business that way, and sometimes it gets them into trouble. But as talented as they are and as much success as they're having, it's not quite the same as when there's another generation of them, a child that now depends upon their success and depends upon their commitment to their sport, that refocuses the mind in a way and brings them often to a zenith, being able to reach their potential in the sport that maybe we wouldn't have seen. You have two sons. Where in this process did you become a father?
It was around the same time I was starting and running Venture for America. The degree of fighting for something bigger than yourself, they were more or less simultaneous, because my son was born essentially right after I started Venture for America. Then my second son was born. And I never would have decided to run for president if not for my experience of being a parent, because I saw just how tough it was on me and Evelyn. And we had things that other parents did not. And so I imagined myself as a single mom dealing with the same stuff. And I was like, oh God, like it blows my mind and breaks my heart what single moms have to go through, because I saw what me and Evelyn went through, and I was like, well, there are two of us and we have some resources. So the experience of being a parent led me to run for president. And I'm glad to hear that boxers tend to elevate their performance after they become parents, because they have maybe a different sense of the motivation and perspective.
How much of your children being born and seeing the world through this different lens changes you and the way you see the world as a grown man?
It changes your perspective an awful lot. And I have two boys, and they remind me of myself in different ways. And you realize how much you've changed from when you were young and tiny and insecure and trying to figure things out. And then you become a man, and then you see your sons and you're like, holy cow. Like I remember being that person. And the circumstances they're growing up in are very different than the circumstances I grew up in. But you want to try and leave the world in an acceptable condition for them. Thanks to the folks who've supported me, I actually feel like I'm on a relatively short list of people that might be able to help whip the world into shape so that my sons aren't growing up in some kind of fucking bizarro Mad Max dystopia. So now I'm looking at it being like, okay, if a majority of Americans agree that we should do something, why don't we do it? And then I realize, well, there are problems with our democracy, with our two-party system, with our legislative incentives, with term limits, with and so now I'm starting to figure out all of the steps I have to take involve public opinion in a way that they did not before. The problems are so big that it requires millions of us to get together to solve, or at least millions of us to get certain people into power and then actually reform our systems so that we can solve problems. Because right now, the software of our government is designed, you could even get a bunch of good people in there and still not get anything done.
You're signing up to be America's single mom. Right.
At this point, the fundamental thing is that I trust myself more than I trust other people to make the right decisions. It's like if there are going to be decisions that are going to be made that are going to affect me and my family, I'd rather be the one to make them. Unfortunately, we're in a situation where there are going to have to be some different decisions being made in positions of power if our families are going to have the kind of shot that we deserve. But that's not really the way things are shaking out right now. Like the problems are getting big and nasty enough where if you have terrible decisions being made in other parts of the country, it could really affect you and your family's ability to live the kind of life that you want for them. And that's a disgusting development. Like that's not something any of us wants. But in my opinion, that is where we are. And if I can do something about it, I'm going to work my heart out to try and do something about it. My goals look different than most other people's goals, but I've got a shot at them.
And you're in the game now. People know your name. You do have a cult of personality that is not devoid of substance. Are your aspirations for higher office infinitely resilient?
There's a poll that came out that I was really touched by. It said I was one of the most popular figures in the country for 2024 if I decided to run, which I was like, wow, that's really touching. I'm still here to try and solve the problems that I ran on. But if there's a way to solve the problems that don't involve my being president, I'm cool with that.
You do have this platform and you still feel like you can solve the problems. What are you doing to put yourself in a position to be the guy that solves the problems outside of the structure of government that can be effective on a mass scale like that?
So one thing is we've been giving money to people because that's Andrew Yang's jam. And thanks to folks who've donated to my organization, Humanity Forward, we've given approximately between $250 and $1,000 to American families that have applied at movehumanityforward.com. We just Cash Apped or Venmo'd or PayPal'd tens of thousands of American families, $8 million. You can't just talk about stuff, you got to do it. The second thing is I'm supporting various candidates around the country that are in favor of universal basic income and a human-centered economy. I'm working on a data rights project that tries to get people paid for our data, because right now we're not getting paid for the $200 billion worth of data value that's getting generated every year. And I've got a podcast, yangspeaks.com, where I sit down with various thinkers and figures to try and talk out how we're going to move the country in a better direction. I've learned a lot from people. It's fun because you have someone really knowledgeable on and then you learn from them and then, it becomes part of an expanded tool set. Those are the things I'm focused on right now. And if you want to keep up with me on social media, it's Andrew Yang on most platforms. And my organization is Humanity Forward at movehumanityforward.com.
It appears to me the two hurdles that you wanted to clear as a young man, you cleared. You'll never be anonymous ever again. You'll always be Andrew Yang.
Oh, thanks, man.
And I got to say, you got a pretty good physical stature. I think you might be able to win a couple of fights here. If it were to jump off, you may be able to defend yourself after all.
That's actually the highest compliment I can receive because I need to. The presidential trail is not good for your physical conditioning. Let's put it that
way. You've got a family that's thriving, 2 kids. What now is the opponent? What now is the focus that you have to overcome to do the thing that Andrew Yang must do to be in this world and happy?
I'm constantly trying to pick things up and learn ideas and solutions and things to offer, and then try and get them actually accomplished in the real world. That's the fight I'm in. So when you ask what I'm fighting right now, it's like, I got to get shit done, man. Like I got to, especially now in a time when people are fucking suffering and dying at record levels. I'm one of the people that might be able to do something about it. I'm fighting all the time to get money into people's hands, solve some of the biggest problems in the land. In a time of suffering, if you're one of the people I can help, like you just got to maximize your contribution.
You were designated as a champion of change by the Obama administration. And sometimes late in a fight, when a fighter goes back to the corner, you don't necessarily know what the score is because you've been in the fight the whole time. So I'm here to tell you, you're winning the fight.
Oh, thank you, man. That's really meaningful.
And the adjustments you can make now, going into what we like to call the championship rounds, are so clear you've already been able to articulate them. That is the biggest battle of all, knowing what adjustments need to be made, being able to articulate and execute them. So I look forward to watching you execute these adjustments and win these championship rounds because, man, you're a hell of a fighter.
Thank you so much. I loved it. I love this metaphor. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Andrew Yang, thank you. Hailing from Schenectady, New York, fighting from a Taekwondo-ready stance, known to sweep the leg, Andrew Yang. To this day, Radio Rahim. To This Day is a Luminary original podcast. It's produced by Pilot Boy and Alex Casnoff for Salt Audio. Executive produced by Dave Chappelle and me, Radio Rahim. Most importantly, I'd like to thank my mom. You may know her as Dr. Rita Muhammad, without whom none of this is possible.
Original audio production, music and sound design by Salt. Executive produced by Pilot Boy. Executive produced by Noah Gersh, Jamie Schefman, Nick Panama, and Kenzi Wilbur. Creative producer, Alex Casnoff. Executive producer, Elliot O'Day. Head of production, Liz LeMay. Head of engineering, Jordan Galvan. Production manager, Allie Strobel. Post coordinator, Alice Bearn. Edited by Geoffrey Mutchnik. Mixed by Salt. Additional editing and sound design by Jasper Van Dijk and Noah Kowalski.